this summit. And I am just so delighted to have our guest today, who is Angela Rose. I met her at a Northwest CASA event, and she was the keynote speaker. And I was moved by her story, and I know you will be too. And you know what? Let me just tell you a little bit about Angela. And she founded the nonprofit organization promoting awareness victim empowerment, which is called PAVE. And she educates people and advocates for surrounding issues of sexual violence. Angela's story is very powerful, and I think I'm going to let her tell you about it, and then we're going to dive deeper into our actual conversation. Hi, Angela, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why don't you tell your story? You tell it a lot better than I would.
Well, sure. Actually, it's the 20-year anniversary this summer of how long that I have dedicated my life to shattering the silence and preventing sexual violence and helping survivors thrive after trauma. And my story was when I was 17, I was kidnapped from a shopping mall in broad daylight, actually. I was leaving my job and I was abducted at knife point by a man who was on parole for murdering a 15-year-old girl. And when I went to report what happened to me, the detectives accused me of lying. And what was so frustrating was that even in that car, though I was completely powerless, my hands were bound behind my back, my eyes were taped shut, I could see just out of the corner of my eyes. And I made a plea, a kind of a vow to myself. I said, if I get out of this alive, he is not going to get away with it. And so I remembered everything that I could. I took control over the one thing that I still had power, even though I was physically powerless. I was able to take control over the one thing that I could, which was my mind and my thoughts. And so I was able to remember all these details about his face and the route that we were going. And when they finally ended up catching him, after they put 2 new detectives on the case, they caught him because the sketch of his face was so accurate that someone recognized him. And so as they explained to me that he was on parole for murder and all these other crimes, I just felt this sense of needing to want to make a difference. You know, I really wanted to feel like I could make a difference in the world. And I met the family of the girl that he had killed, and we changed laws in Illinois. We were able to really work together, and that was something that was very, very powerful for me, was to be able to turn my pain into something positive to help other people. And that, to me, made all the difference. And I think having that support of other people who understood what I was going through was really powerful for me. And, I know we're going to talk about some of the ways that I have used art to heal, but that's a very important part of PAVE's mission, is using creative outlets.
I love that. I want to go, before we move on, I do want to talk a little bit about changing laws, because, this is an activist conference as well. It's creative activism. So can you just talk about the power and what it took for you to get laws changed?
Sure. So we understood the power of working with the media, now social media, of course, but back then there wasn't social media back in 1996. But what we did is I started this petition drive with my family, the family of the girl that he had killed, and other of his previous victims. And we just went very grassroots. We started this petition drive stating the need for tougher laws for repeat sex offenders, because as this man was, that was the passion that I had in the beginning. And so people that I didn't even know, Ray, were standing outside getting signatures on these petitions. Pretty soon we had over 5,000 signatures. And so with the Chicago media behind us, we took them to the president of the Illinois Senate, and pretty soon the Attorney General called, and it was something where I saw very early on that the people have the power to make a difference when they want to. And I was really inspired. And I actually came across, for Social Media Throwback Thursday, I came across an article from way back in the day. And I had told the Daily Herald in Chicago back in 1996, quote, I don't know what I can do to help prevent this from happening again, but I'm going to try everything that I can. And here we are 20 years later, still working on these issues. And so I think one message that I have to anybody is that there's a lot of power in one person's voice, and working collaboratively, finding great partners and working together, it can really make a big difference.
Thank you. That was perfect. Okay. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. So I think since we're in this arena right now, let's talk about how pave evolved. You had the laws changed in Illinois. How did you decide to then move on into this other arena and start your own organization?
Well, as I was doing all this community organizing, I was really amazed at how many people were impacted by intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and I was really feeling the need to do something. So when I went away to college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I looked for a group like PAVE to join. I was really excited to turn my energy into activism and to, continue to do this work. And there wasn't one. And so what I realized is I didn't want to reinvent the wheel or step on anybody's toes. And so for months, I tried to figure out what's the missing piece. And so I interviewed people. I did a lot of research. I spent months just trying to find out what's that missing piece. And what we realized was the prevention side that engages men and women in a very positive and a proactive way, like the peer education, that was something. And then also helping people go not just from victim to survivor, but to thriver. Because we worked really closely with local rape crisis centers, profoundly important work, but that was really kind of triage for a lot of survivors. It helped them in that moment, very important. But what about afterwards? How to learn how to love and trust and to really holistically feel whole again. And so the prevention side of things, there's actually a class called PAVE through the School of Social Work at UW-Madison where students, even now to this day, get class credit to become peer educators. And so we also have done a series of empowerment summits across the country, and it's been amazing to see how this evolves.
Well, as the aftercare piece, and I know that part intimately from my own experience, that yes, you survive, but going to that thriver stage is a whole other ball game. And for me, creativity was the key. I mean, and I love the therapists I had. They got me to a place where I was healthy enough. I got married, I had kids, and but I was only surviving. There was just this part of me that was turned off to life, and it wasn't until I got into creativity and drawing and painting and journaling and photography and all these pieces that the light went on again in me. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that piece for you. And I know music's been a big part of yours, and some of the work you're using within the context of this empowerment, the arts.
Absolutely. Well, from the beginning, we did a lot of work with film and with photos and music. And the reason why, for me, I became so passionate about the music piece is that it's always been in my family. It's been, music has always been such a huge part of my life. And when I was able to funnel some of these emotions that were confusing for me into lyrics, into song, it was something that felt very freeing to me. And when we were working on a film called Transition to Survivor, which was highlighting some survivor stories, their journeys from victim to survivor to thriver, we needed a theme song. And we, when I was looking at how much it would cost to license something like that, it was just outrageous. And so for us to get into the studio and to really create music, it was really, really powerful. So that was great. And we realized that there's, sexual assault and domestic violence, it comes with such a lot of people get very defensive. It's a very difficult subject to broach, and we realized that the more that we could use art to kind of get through all those defense mechanisms and hit people right in the soul, we saw how much easier that was. So we did a series of events across the country, anywhere from small town Nebraska to Soho, New York, working with MTV, working on something called Art for Awareness, where we brought together musicians and poets and lots of different types of people and different creative arts to shatter the silence of violence. And that was really, really powerful. We partnered with a famous spoken word artist. His name's Steve Connell, and he's been on HBO Def Poetry and MTV and lots of different things. But he created an entire CD based on Pave's work of spoken word poetry. And some survivors that have heard it said that it was more healing than years of therapy because they just felt like he understood. And it was, we've really used the arts in different ways throughout the years, and we found it to have a really, profoundly impactful in a positive way impact.
Well, and I love what you just said, because even though they've been in therapy and somebody else says it in a way that just touches their soul and opens you up. and you hear
Exactly.
it, whether it's through the music, the visual, the spoken word, and that also creates the awareness in the community. You could, it's not just for the survivor. You've got a family. Everybody's affected by the incident. It just doesn't one person alone on an island. It affects everyone, and so then when we can create that awareness and that hope, and that's the other piece, is offering hope. You're not alone. And I think, when you have those events that you were just talking about, when you create a CD, when you have somebody sharing these stories, and that's what's so powerful, that changes you aren't the victim anymore, and I think it just up levels your ability to grow as a person and to live the life that you deserve and want. So
Absolutely. No, I agree
what
with that 100%.
Well, one of the the projects that I saw that was interesting to me was the binding project. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It was actually the 10-year anniversary of when I was kidnapped, and the one trigger that I still had, and a lot of survivors have what could be a trigger. It could be a song, it could be a smell, it could be a thing, a place, whatever it is, but it's that certain thing that brings you back to feeling completely powerless. And so for me, it was zip ties, those plastic zip ties that, you hold cables together with. That was my trigger because that's what the perpetrator in my case used to bind my hands behind my back. And so that was the one thing, if I saw it in a store, I would just freeze. And I was with one of my friends, and we were in the Container Store of all places, and I just completely froze when I saw those in the store. And she said, "Well, are you okay? And I told her that was my trigger. And she said, "Well, Angela, you need to own those. Like, that should be the art project." So we developed a binding project, and it's been incredible to see thousands of these bands come back. So the project is people write one word that empowers them on these zip tie bracelets, and they wear one to show solidarity with the movement, and then they send one back to us. And we did an installation art piece at the Amnesty International Human Rights Arts Festival with all these thousands of zip tie bracelets. And what was so amazing to me was not just the fact that I overcame that trigger where those don't bother me anymore, but perhaps more importantly was that it inspired other survivors to overcome their triggers. There's a young woman who was assaulted by her gynecologist, and her one trigger was Valentine's because it happened on Valentine's Day. So, hearts and cards and things that are supposed to represent love to her represented, that terrible negative experience that she had to endure. And so, inspired by the Binding Project, she put together this great big coalition of people. There was a big march in her town in Texas, and they had these giant red hearts and Valentines, and that was a way that she could overcome that trigger. And because of that awareness piece, actually 2 other women came forward that the same perpetrator had done that too. So it's amazing how, like you mentioned before, sometimes it's a combination of both the healing and the awareness and prevention side.
Right. And I agree with that totally. And I love you're giving people ideas, and that was part of the reason I wanted to host this Creative Activist Summit, because people who are listening in your communities, here are some great ideas what you can do to empower people. I work in several different arenas in Chicago, and one is on sex trafficking, one is on domestic violence, one is on child sexual abuse. So I cover the gamut here. But these are the kind of projects that we can bring back to our own communities, and and you don't have to create the wheel. Somebody else has already done it, and there are ways to contact. Why don't you just tell people how they can get a hold of you and find out more information about some of these great projects?
Sure. Our website is shatteringthesilence.org, and all that information is up on the website, and also people can sign up for our newsletter. We do a newsletter to keep people informed of all the great projects and happenings, and I think it's really important to work in coalition with other people. When I first started PAVE at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, success definitely happens when people work together, and we really looked outside the box of what are the people that maybe aren't at the table that should be. And back in the day, we did pretty groundbreaking work inviting students of color to the table, the LGBT community, and really looking at this work holistically, which at that point wasn't done all the time, So we're very proud of that, and I think as people are listening and thinking about creating change in their communities, think about what people should be at the table that aren't, and reach out.
I love that. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody else yesterday just about that. So
Oh,
it is important, because we that's how you engage people, and also you have to have a clear vision of what you want. I think that's the other piece. And
absolutely.
what is your vision for you going forward for your organization? Where do you see yourself?
Well, short term, I am taking a maternity leave, which will be interesting because I've always done this work. And so after 20 years, I'm definitely taking a legitimate maternity leave, which is going to be, it's going to be amazing for me. I feel like it's almost like sending my baby to college to,
I love it.
welcome another baby into the world. But self-care is so important, and I am a big proponent of self-care. And, I think for PAVE moving forward, we're doing a lot of work now in high schools. We've spent so much time on the college front, but all the research is telling us that the best way to prevent sexual assault in college is to start the conversation younger. So we launched an incredible national campaign called Safe Bay, which stands for Before Anyone Else. And as a part of Safe Bay, we brought together 4 high school survivors, and they also were featured in an upcoming documentary coming out on Netflix this fall called Audrey and Daisy about high school sexual assault. And so we got a grant from Verizon and from some other partners, and we were able to create these incredible educational videos that when we piloted them this last semester, the statistical, significance of the impact that we had was remarkable in terms of people learning about bystander intervention, how to support a survivor, what is consent, and so we also do a lot of professional development. We look at this bottom up and top down. So not only are we getting the students involved and engaged, we launched an incredible campaign called Consent Is, that works with the Safe Bay movement, where it's all about consent and educating young people on what that means. And then we also work from the top down, where we're working with administrators, looking at their Title IX policies. I do a lot of professional development myself for guidance counselors and teachers, because the first person that a survivor tells, if they react well, that's greatly going to impact the healing process. So for us moving forward, we just want to grow what we've already created. We've got, we did a bunch of pre and post tests. We see what we're doing is making a difference. So now we just need to really scale what we've built. And that was a beautiful thing about, how humbled I was to be invited to the White House Summit for Women and Girls. They wanted me to talk about this work because, this is pretty groundbreaking to be working in the high schools in this way with survivors and, really leveraging the voice of survivors.
I love that. I happened to, at one point, we had worked together in the National Council of Jewish Women. We had put together a program, and we went and we partnered with college kids from Northwestern, and we piloted this program, and we took them with us to the high school, thinking the material was rich and it was really good, and it became part of somebody else's program who was a professional, service organization. But we thought bringing in people who were much closer to their age to talk about it was at that time was pretty groundbreaking. So I understand
that makes all the difference. We have a healthy relationships task force in the high school. So when we did all of the work this semester, we actually not only had the trained workshop facilitators to come in, but we also brought in high school students that we trained to help give that material, because you're right, Ray, it really resonates so much louder and clearer when it's coming from somebody that they can identify with, 1,000%.
Right. If you're looking at a 50-year-old person, you're looking at your mom,
right,
kind of
right,
thing. And it's
exactly.
like, I don't want to talk about sex in front of my mom. I don't want to talk about relationships. I don't want to talk about anything. Yeah. So, and we tried using videos. There were some videos and stuff that had come out, and and it's been evolving. What I love, because I have the perspective of working like you have for 20 plus years on this subject, you've seen where it was a women's issue. Then then it was men and women, and now it's a human rights issue. It's for everyone, and it cuts across all the boards. And we didn't look at it that way. And so there's been this progress, and I love being able to say that it's not just one thing anymore, and there are more voices at the table, and who isn't there, and that we do have these conversations. I one of my conversations, and I'm just, because we're really talking here, I feel that oftentimes right now, there's a buzzword for getting grants right now is sex trafficking, and it's something identifiable yes, the first initial thought, oh, it doesn't happen in my community, and then they hear it does, and it's like, wow, oh my God, I got to do something. But at the same time, so many of the kids are runaways, and it's because they are being sexually and physically abused at home. It's the LGBT community, they're not being respected, and so they leave, and they're on the streets. And we're still not addressing the family in the sense of where it's coming from in the beginning. And I don't know the answer to that, but I'd love to have a conversation about that, because sexual abuse is still underlying a lot of the problems that we're seeing when we get kids on the streets.
Oh, absolutely. I think oftentimes our society doesn't look at that root cause, so we even see that in counseling. If you see somebody who's dealing with issues of eating disorders or self-harm or, things like that, a lot of times even the counselors and therapists won't ask the question about some type of root cause of sexual trauma. And so
Right.
I think we see that universally, that we really need to start asking those questions. And I think, really also having a great mentorship program is so important, because there are a lot of families and parents that unfortunately, didn't have the kind of family that I was very grateful to be brought up
Right.
in. Everybody has different challenges, and I think really looking at mentorship programs is really important, making sure that people have that supportive person, even if it might not be blood, finding
Right.
things where they can have that supportive outlet, because it is very easy for young people to be put in these vulnerable positions and situations. I can tell you from my work with at-risk youth, I've done a lot of work with incarcerated and juvenile, some students that are in the juvenile justice system, and even with gangs and with all these things, they were just looking for family. A lot of
Right.
these kids are just looking for love, and even if it's in all the wrong places, we need to also make sure that we're looking at those red flags and looking for ways that we can intervene and make sure that we get people back on the right path. So, yeah, I agree with you.
I agree. There has to, and I love the word mentorship. One of the organizations I've been working with is called the Jewish Community Abuse Response Education Solutions, JCARES. And so we've instituted, and I love this model over the last few years, it was started with safe synagogues and then safe schools, where we go in and we train the staff and the rabbis and the teachers, and we give them information about abuse and what's required by law, what to do when you see it, giving them options and ideas of how to handle it, because it's a very scary subject. And when do you report? When don't you report? What is mandated, what isn't? And I know it's been growing steadily in the Chicago area, and I love that model, because there are more and more people, because now you are creating a safe place for somebody, because if you're talking about it from a pulpit of some sort, or in a newsletter or at a school function, at a PTA meeting, then people know it's okay. There is some form of safety in that, and I think that's a really important key as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and really, like you said, working with the community and I think, you mentioned the work that you do with Jewish women and families. I think really looking at this holistically and bringing in communities of faith is so powerful as well. That's something that we've done a little bit of work in, that we're looking to grow, is, reaching out to these communities of faith, because there's just so much opportunity with the youth groups, and with, you already have these great audiences. So I've done, we as an organization have done a decent amount of presentations in various different communities of faith, but I would love to see that grow.
Right, I agree. I think it's, there are so many people who do want to, I was just, you never know when you're going to have a conversation. I was at a little meetup group on Sunday, and it's how can we support each other? And it turned out, this girl comes in late, and we were talking about forgiveness, and all of a sudden she's disclosing to me about her father, and it's like, oh, and then the other woman's sitting there, oh, my husband abused me, I was a minister's wife. And, when somebody is willing to share their personal story, then it opens up the possibilities for other people. And I think that's what you do every day when you're out speaking, and that's what I hope I do as well. So I think that's a really key piece of growth for all of us, and changing the conversations. Because it's about, there's so many people who are apathetic, and it's like, it's their problem. It's not mine. It doesn't happen in my house, so what do I care? Yet we need to be able to engage them in some way, and start saying, well, what if this happened to your mother, your sister, your daughter? How would you feel then? kind of thing. I'm using it. It can work the other way, guys, too. It can be, if your son or husband, something bad happens to them. But it's still mostly women who are victims.
Well, and you brought up a great point, though, too, is we need to also make sure that we're educating people, especially in communities of faith, of how to respond when somebody discloses. Number one is you always believe that person. There's so much victim-blaming language, unfortunately, that still exists. So making sure that we never blame the survivor for anything that happened, believing that person, offering them local resources, a listening ear. There's a great little checklist on our website of how to support somebody that discloses. And that's one of the most critical pieces, because if somebody doesn't believe them or, kind of shushes them or tells them not to talk about it, then oftentimes it takes them a long time to open up to anyone again. So, I think that's a really important piece of it too.
I agree. I want to ask you about your work with the White House right now, and that you're doing the work with It's On Us campaign, and how that is, you're working in conjunction with them, and what have been some of the challenges of going forward and moving in that arena with a government-based program?
Well, I have to give props, regardless of what anybody's political affiliation is. I have been extremely impressed by the leadership of this administration on the issue of sexual assault. Vice President Joe Biden has really taken this on, and he means it. I mean, one of our pave ambassadors was on stage with Lady Gaga at the Oscars earlier this year, and to see
I watched that.
him,
Yep.
wasn't that so powerful?
Oh, it was so
incredible.
I mean, that was the power of music. That's the power of, and the visual image. It just moved people. You couldn't ignore it. Yeah.
It was incredibly powerful, and so it was so interesting because the vice president went up to Julia Dixon, it's her name, our PAVE ambassador. She speaks across the country on behalf of PAVE on these issues, and she was raped her first week of college in Akron, Ohio, and they started talking, and he said, I want to call your father. And so she gives him her cell phone, and he calls her dad and invites them to the White House. I mean, he is doing this, from such a place of good intentions and from the heart. It's just been amazing. But I think, leveraging the celebrities that they were able to, and I was very humbled and excited to be invited to the White House for the launch of the It's On Us campaign. I've worked with them as a contributor to the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault. And seeing the way that this has grown because of that awareness is really profound. I mean, I really look at how much we've come in the last couple of years compared to the, 17 years prior for how long I've been doing this.
Right.
We've taken some major strides. We still have a long way to go, but we've come a long way.
Well, as the administration is winding down on this, I again, we don't know what's going to happen in November. I have my own joy and hopeful, but we won't go there. But I want to talk about, what do you think needs to be done on the level of legislation or mandates, or even around the world? Women are still being assaulted around the world. And what do you think we need to do and to change that and to, create a safer world?
Well, when we're talking about global issues, I'm very passionate about looking at the honor killings that are still happening.
Right.
And, it's just incredible to me that we live in such an age where, and it's not even prosecuted. We look at what happened,
that 26-year-old just got killed by her brother,
exactly.
Because I was like, oh, that is so horrible. So horrible. Yeah. And he was proud of it.
And he was proud of it, exactly, and there's no repercussions. And so, I think that is something I'm very passionate about. But looking here locally, a couple things that we're really looking at is making sure that there's anonymous climate surveys on college campuses to ensure that administrations understand and know what's really happening on campus. I think we also need to have a lot more gender-neutral language. I know that obviously women are, more disproportionately assaulted than men, but there are so many male survivors. And a lot of times our movement silences them, or people that don't identify as women, people in the LGBT community, trans. There's so many different types of people out there. And the more that we use gendered language, especially in policy, it's something where, that's definitely a passion of mine as well. I've talked to a lot of male survivors over the years, some of which I was the only person that they've ever told because they didn't feel like they could. There's obviously a level of shame that's associated with sexual assault that sometimes is even more intense when it's a male who is, the survivor of these crimes. So, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think from the criminal justice system, that's still appalling to me, the way that survivors are treated when they try and report. We do a lot of law enforcement training. We talk about the neurobiology of trauma to help law enforcement understand what's going on in the mind of a survivor. That's a whole other workshop, but I think that from that piece of the puzzle, that we may have come a long way on the awareness, but from what we're seeing, still boots on the ground with survivors reporting, it's atrocious. So we still have a long way to go.
Okay, I know you are going to be speaking very soon, so I'm going to start wrapping this up. What would you say to anybody who wants to start getting involved in making change in the world? What would you tell them to do?
Well, I think you mentioned it briefly a little earlier, is really having the power of vision. I wrote a book that's called Hope, Healing, and Happiness, Going Inward to Transform Your Life. And it really talks about the power of visualization and knowing what you want, really understanding what it is that the outcomes that you seek so you can really know how to define success. When I first started this years and years ago, I just knew I wanted to make a difference. I just wasn't sure how. And so over the years, really learning how to hone in on, creating a great business plan and business model and making sure that what you're doing is sustainable, but also self-care, making sure that you take care of yourself, because whatever we're passionate about, sometimes we can put 1,000% into that. And I have lost relationships over that. Thankfully, I am, in a very healed and happy place, and I, married my best friend. He's extremely supportive, but it's really important to make sure that you always put, yourself, your family, your faith first, and everything else will fall into place. It's very easy to get sucked in to whatever movement you're passionate about.
So what's your favorite self-care tool that you would love to share with someone?
There's a great coloring book that we have on our website that we love. But, for us, we'd like to let people know that self-care is different for everybody. I love doing vision boards. For me, it's my Sunday night bubble bath and candles, whatever that is for people, but just scheduling that time and protecting that time. Because especially for women, we're givers, and me soon to be a mother, I talk to a lot of my friends who are moms and how difficult it is to find time for themselves. But the more that we give to ourselves, the more we're able to give to other people. And so I would just say whatever that means to you, because it's different things for different people.
Well, thank you so much, Angela. And this is Ray Luskin, and, she was just mentioning a vision. My vision is to create a movement to engage, educate, and empower 1 million creative activists. I believe through sharing our creative voices, as we were just doing, and our visions, we can raise awareness of important social issues, move people from apathy to action, and drive change. And each of us can make a difference. And so, Angela, thank you so much for participating, and I'm so glad people are just going to come away with so many great ideas. And please check out their website. And this is Ray Luskin. I know that you can make a difference. Have a great day.